Welcome to the HuntFishTravel podcast, the first and longest running female hosted hunting podcast. She thinks at the end of the day your feet should be dirty, that your hair should be messy, and your eyes should be sparkling from the joy of camping. But first, she's ready to help you navigate your trip of a lifetime. And now, here's your hostess, Gary Zilka.
Welcome to HuntFishTravel podcast. I am your hostess, Gary Zilka. It has been a couple of years since Gary Cornum from Easton Archery has been on the show, so we thought it was about time to come back on and talk about some arrows, because it's summer and I've got 3D archery on the brain and hunting is coming up. Gary Cornum is the marketing manager for Easton and a very big supporter and friend of the show. So Gary, welcome back.
Well, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
So I looked up the last time ATA, like mini episodes aside, last time you were on the show was like 4 years ago. I'm like, that's too long.
No way. Really?
Yeah, 2013.
Gosh, I would have said a year ago.
I know.
I would have for sure said a year ago. Oh, that's crazy.
HuntFishTravel just turned 5 in May. I've been doing this for 5 years.
Goodness.
That's craziness.
Wow.
Most podcasts don't even last 12 months.
Yeah. Wow. Where does the time go? That's crazy.
I know. One of my favorite things about Easton Archery is you guys are always more than happy to come on the show and talk tech, or even just every time I've called and had questions, you guys are so crazy helpful. It's wonderful customer service.
Well, that's great. And that's, we've been around 95 years making arrows, and so it's what we think about all day long. And I'm always so happy to talk about it and to provide information that, it's something that we think about day in and day out. So not everybody does. And so we can take some of that thought process and put it out there and really, hopefully get some information out there that'll help people in their enjoyment of archery and bow hunting. Definitely.
So for this episode, I thought a really great topic would be some tips on buying new arrows. Last year, I went and I bought some Eastons, and I bought the wrong kind. So now I have 12 arrows sitting in my basement that really aren't suitable for me. So I went back and I bought another 12 arrows.
Sure.
It was an expensive lesson. So now that it's kind of 3D archery time, and I was like, you know what? Maybe we could pick your brain and just get a couple of the top tips you would give somebody if they're going into a pro shop, not sure what to buy, things that they might look for.
Absolutely. So let's just go to the basics, and if we cover those, then as you go up, there's more details you can talk about in terms of performance. But let's cover the basics first. And what I would say is there's some confusion about size. So if I go to a Deer Classic, say, and I'm talking to ask somebody what their arrow size is, a lot of times they'll give me their arrow length, and that is an important aspect. But what we're talking about in terms of size is the spine, and people maybe don't even know what that is. So let's just cover a few of the basic terms real quick. Spine is actually the stiffness of the arrow. So we measure the spine of an arrow by putting it at a given span length, and then putting it's about a 2-pound weight, and that's a standard weight that is used in the industry. And what it does is it measures the deflection with 2 pounds roughly hanging from that span of the arrow. And that spine is the stiffness. It measures the stiffness of the arrow. Now, why that's important? Well, you have bow hunters or archers of different. They use different poundage and different arrow lengths, and you need to find the right stiffness for your setup. So the things that would affect that are your arrow length, your correct arrow length, and your bow poundage, generally speaking. So a setup that uses a longer arrow and higher poundage requires a stiffer arrow than, say, one that is shorter with lighter poundage. So those things affect it, and other things affect it too, like point weight. If you're shooting a heavier point weight, your bowstring is pushing against more weight, so you'd need a stiffer arrow for that. So when we're talking about arrow size, often we're talking about the spine or the stiffness that's needed. And so what we do is a lot of people know we have different spines or sizes that we make. So say, if you look at, say, a full metal jacket arrow, you might have a a 500, a 400, a 340, and a 300, and those are available at the pro shop. And that's just measuring the stiffness of the arrow. So a 300 is actually the deflection, or when you hang that weight, so a third of an inch, roughly 0.300 inches, versus, say, a 500, that deflects a half inch, so 0.500, so it's not as stiff. So what you need to do, and you don't need to remember all this, or the listeners don't need to remember all this, what they just need to do is understand that basic. So if I'm shooting more poundage, I need a stiffer arrow. So you want to match your setup to the right arrow spine, and that can be found if you go to a pro shop. It can be found on the Easton website at eastonarchery.com. You can go there and you can put in your bow poundage, your point weight, and your arrow length, and it'll kick out the right arrow spine. Or you can go to a pro shop, there's arrow charts there, and then it'll say, okay, based on what you've put in here in those parameters, you need a 400 or you need a 340. And then once you know that, then you can go to other things like, what kind of arrow do I want? Do I want a carbon arrow? Do I want a full metal jacket? Just depending on, you can look at the different performance aspects, but regardless of what you're going to be picking in terms of what the arrow's made of, whether it's carbon or aluminum carbon or whatever it might be, you still use the same spine across all those different materials. So once you've determined that and you don't change your setup, you can just kind of remember that I shoot a 400. So I'd say the basics are you just need to learn what stiffness you need, and that's the most important thing. And if you don't know, or you don't know how to determine it, you go into a qualified pro shop and they can help you find that out as well.
So explain a little bit, the lower the number, the more stiff it is, correct? So that's
correct. Yeah, because you think about it, so if we hang a weight on an arrow, it's going to sag in the middle, right?
Yes.
So the less amount that it sags, the stiffer the arrow. So that's what we measure. So we hang 2 pounds in the center of the arrow, and then we measure that. And that's all done with our engineering group, and they determine that. So we have standardized numbers. So a 300 is the amount of deflection, or the amount it sags off of the center. So a 300 is 0.300 inches. Now, if you have an arrow that's not as stiff, like a 500 or a 400 would deflect 0.400 inches. A 500 would deflect 0.500 inches. So as you see, as that number gets larger, the amount the arrow deflects when that same weight is hung from the center, that's more flexing. So that's how that's measured. And again, that's all built into the chart. So if you go on, say, go to eastonarchery.com, down at the bottom of the page, we have a arrow selection. You can put in there, I shoot 60 pounds. My arrow length is 28 inches. I shoot 100 grain point. It'll ask you for a few things like that. What the ATA rating is of your bow, that kind of thing. It'll ask you those questions, and then it'll kick it out for you automatically and say, oh, you need a 340, based on what you've said, or just to use an example as a number. But it'll kick that number out based on the parameters you put in there, and then once you know that, you go into a pro shop, or you go into a Cabela's, or wherever you might be, wherever you go to buy your arrows, and that. I need a 400. We'll also put it on the packaging. The pro shops have arrow selection charts in their shop to help you determine that if you don't know. So we make that information available, pretty much anywhere that our arrows are sold, and also on our website. So it's easy for people to determine what arrow spine or size that they need. If you don't know what arrow length you shoot, you could go into a pro shop and take your bow in there, and they can help you find out where the best place to cut your arrow is. And those things can be done at a qualified Eastern pro shop as well. And so I always recommend, if somebody doesn't know what size to shoot, that's the first thing that, as far as, arrow basics. And then from there, I like to talk about, what materials, you shoot. Do I want to shoot carbon? Do I want to shoot a lighter arrow? Those kinds of things. That's sort of secondary once you know what arrow size you need to put in your bow.
Okay. So we actually went over some of this too. And listen, for the listeners, if you want to go back, and you can always listen to episode 35 where we talk hunting arrow tech, where we really dove deep into kinetic energy and a lot of the really technical stuff. It's one of the most popular episodes in the 5 years that I've been around to this day, because it's so technical and stuff. But why don't you just briefly give reasons between the different types of arrows, the carbon versus aluminum and the hybrids?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So, back in the day, and like I said, Easton, just to give a quick background, Easton was started in 1922. Doug Easton was making wood arrows and longbows, believe it or not. And he became, frustrated because every wood arrow is completely unique and different. So it was really hard to get a set to group. He invented the aluminum arrow, and that changed everything. That changed archery. Groups became very tight. Aluminum is a very consistent material. And even our tournament shooters to this day, the ones especially shooting indoors, still use an all aluminum arrow, and some bow hunters do too. That was what carried us through the 1970s and the 1980s as bow hunting really, maybe you might even think of it as a golden age of bow hunting, right, where the sport really caught on, and aluminum was kind of the mainstay. Well, back in those same days, we started experimenting with other materials. Aluminum is still the most precise, most accurate material that we can use to make an arrow. That's why tournament shooters still use them. We started experimenting with other materials, particularly carbon, and the reason we use carbon is because it's very lightweight and strong, and so you can get a lot of speed from a bow, and it's a strong, durable material. But the carbon, where it fails, or where it's kind of faltering as a material, is it's not as consistent as the aluminum. So it's not quite as accurate as a material, but in most cases we can, and Easton, we make ours here in the United States, really right behind the wall that I'm sitting in right here in Utah. We make ours here. We use processes that make our carbon very consistent. There's no seams in it. It has a very consistent, from weight, spine, which is stiffness, and also straightness. So, but it's still there's some variability in carbon that make it so it's not quite as accurate as the aluminum, but it is very strong and durable and lightweight. So then, as we experimented with carbon back in the early 80s, we also Jim Easton, in a second generation of the company, Doug Easton's son, he started to experiment with using the two materials together, and that would be combining aluminum and carbon. And what we found is that aluminum being very, very consistent and precise, carbon being very durable and lightweight. When you marry the two materials, they work in concert with one another. So what you get is a very accurate arrow that's also durable and lightweight by putting those materials together. And those are the arrows that have been used really since that time to win at the highest level of competitive archery, like in the Olympics. And to this day, they still use a hybrid of aluminum and carbon. And what that is it's an aluminum core tube on the inside with carbon on the outside, carbon wrapped around on the outside. And then we moved that over into the hunting world. That was really the pinnacle, the flagship, state-of-the-art arrow when about 20 to 25 years ago when that aluminum carbon material came out. That was the pinnacle of the hunting market. And kind of was for several years, and shooters were using aluminum. They were using carbon, and then they were using the hybrid, the aluminum carbon hybrid. And then back in 2006, we at Easton started experimenting with reversing the setup. So we would put the aluminum on the outside and the carbon on the inside. And what that does is it adds kinetic energy to the setup. It makes it it adds a little more punch, which is more conducive to hunting. So the carbon on the outside is more conducive to long range tournament shooting. Still makes a good hunting arrow, very good hunting, very precise. But when you reverse it, you're pulling more kinetic energy into the system, and that's where the full metal jacket really shines, and that's what we called it. It's because the aluminum's on the outside, so we called it the full metal jacket, and that's a hybrid, really designed for the hunting market. Specifically is what we call, our full metal jacket line, and that's really the flagship of our line today. The other aspect of the Easton line that I should probably mention too is back in 2004 we started experimenting with micro diameter arrows. People might remember the first carbon arrows that came out were very small. The limitation there was that the componentry had to go on the outside of the arrow shaft, and it made some difficulties in terms of how it cleared your arrow rest, how long you needed to leave it so it would clear your arrow rest, and then pulling from targets and things, and alignment was an issue by having to put those components on the outside of the shaft. Well, back in then carbon came on the scene, which solved that problem, but they were larger diameter. Well, back in 2004, we looked at that system and said, boy, wouldn't it be great if we could put components on the inside of the shaft, but still make a micro diameter arrow, and that's when we came out with the Axis. That was then followed by the full metal jacket, which is also a micro diameter shaft. And so really we've been engineering and developing micro diameter shafts since that time, and really almost the full line of Easton arrows are in that micro category. And then from there, last couple of years, we've got so many now that we said, well, how do we help the archers and the bow hunters really understand our line? Because we were calling them, this is a G diameter, this is an H diameter, and it got kind of confusing. So what we did to make it easier for people to understand is our hunting line now is we designate it with millimeters. So our smallest hunting arrows are 4 millimeter, and then they go up to 5 millimeter. That was the original Axis, was a 5 millimeter, and it still is a 5 millimeter today. And then the 6 millimeter is kind of our it's still a micro diameter. The standard carbon arrows that most companies sell are 6.5 millimeters. So the main line, almost all of the hunting arrows that Easton produces are 6, 5, and 4. So they're all micro diameter. And I always tell people, you shoot the smallest one you can afford to get, and they kind of go up in price from there. So 6 millimeters more the entry level, and then 5 as you go down, and then 4 millimeters the kind of the pinnacle of our market. And the full metal jacket line is also available. So we have all carbon 4, 5, and 6 millimeter arrows, and we also have full metal jacket arrows that come in 4, 5, and 6 millimeters. So you can kind of play around with what you're trying to do and what you want your setup to be. But just as a kind of a rule of thumb, I look at it as if you're looking for a little more speed out of your setup, you might want to go with an all-carbon, like an all-carbon Axis. If you are looking for a added kinetic energy, then take that system and go with the full metal jacket, and then pick your diameter based on as what you could afford. Now, if you shoot a 4 millimeter, you need to use deep 6 components. That's deep 6 broadheads and field points. So that was our innovation that we came out with about 5 years ago, and a brand new system was required to make that work because they are so small in the 4 millimeter. But there's very little friction as they fly, so they carry more kinetic energy and more speed downrange. And then once they impact the target, they go through that target with less friction because they are so small. And that's the advantage of shooting the small diameter arrows, whether it be in the all carbon or in the hybrid, the full metal jacket variety.
Oh, that's awesome. Just personally, what is the biggest, so I've been shooting the Axis, and I feel like they've been shooting straighter. They've been shooting just more true for me than the FMJs that I've always had. Of course, I was shooting FMJ 400s, and now I'm shooting Axis 500s, so big difference there too. But
yeah, and a lot of it has to do with what tunes best in your setup. The Axis is a great. I shoot. I'll shoot carbon injection. That's the 4 millimeter, or I'll shoot the 5 millimeter Axis, and I usually do that. What I like about those is they're a little bit lighter weight. So if I'm looking for a little more speed, usually that's for my hunts out west. I'll go with what you use. But a lot of it is splitting hairs. In other words, you can shoot Axis if that's what works for you. you're not going to notice a huge performance difference in most hunting situations. Like I said, if you're trying to milk a little more speed out of your system, you might want to go with one of our all carbon offerings, whether it be the 6mm. We have a 6mm axis, we have the 5mm axis, and we have the 4mm carbon injection. And so I would pick one of those. Now, what I like about the full metal jacket is that, again, you get the precision of the aluminum and the added kinetic energy, but you're also getting the backbone, the durability, and the lightweight durability of the carbon on the inside. I get this question a lot, though, from people about full metal jacket. The thing they always ask me is, will they bend? And I've been shooting those since we came out with them back in 2006. I've shot the 4, 5, and 6mm FMJs, and I haven't bent one in a situation where it wouldn't have broken my carbon arrow. So from a durability standpoint, and I can't say you couldn't bend one, but they're not susceptible to bending, and it isn't a problem. That I get that question a lot, because I think people remember when our whole line was aluminum arrows, and that's really all you could get for hunting, is you'd shoot them and they could bend, and then they weren't as accurate. That problem is because you have the carbon core on the full metal jacket. That's really not a problem. I've shot sets of arrows that I've retired, and I've never had an issue with durability on the full metal jacket. So I'd like to answer that question for folks, for as many listeners as we have, is really, it's not an issue. Where I would pick it, I wouldn't pick say an Axis over a full metal jacket because of durability. I would pick it more for what you're saying. One shoots better out of my bow, or I'm trying to get more speed by using an all carbon arrow. And if I'm looking for, again, a very precise arrow with more kinetic energy, that's why I would pick a full metal jacket.
Awesome. That's a perfect answer. All right, so we have first two tips you were understanding spine stiffness. Second tip was the different types of material, understanding the different types of material and choosing the one that works best for your situation. What would be the third tip you would give somebody going to buy new arrows?
What I would tell somebody, and this is probably not as technical of an answer, but it can be very confusing out there. There's so many kinds of arrows. If you go to a store that has a wall of arrows and all this packaging, all these different brands, it can be very confusing. Even if you go to our website or open up a catalog, and you see all these different models, and it can be daunting. Which one should I pick? Well, what I would look for, because everybody's trying to, they're trying to get your sale, they're trying to get you, so they say, hey, mine's the best, mine's great. First of all, don't be intimidated. Any of the arrows in the Easton line are going to work great for you in almost all hunting situations. If you're going on a really specialized hunt, say a moose hunt or a brown bear or something down in Africa, a dangerous game, then you might want to look at a very specialized arrow. But for most of our North American game, elk, whitetail, mule deer, bears, hogs, that kind of thing, almost any arrow in the Easton line, in fact, really any arrow on our line is going to work great for you. It's just a matter of fine-tuning your setup. So it's like I was saying before. First of all, don't be intimidated by it. Where you have price differences are things like how straight the arrows are. So when arrows come out of our production, we put extra processing into them to make them more precise. So we add more value by putting it through further processing, and so if you spend more on our line, you're probably going to get an arrow that's a little straighter, a little more consistent. Most arrows, though, any arrow in the Easton line, I would have no problem picking up from our low end all the way to our top end. I can shoot our entry-level aftermath carbon arrow in 6mm is an excellent arrow, and I would have no problem. I can walk out back and shoot any arrow I want. I would have no problem going out on a hunt with our aftermath, and that's kind of our entry-level carbon. So first of all, you could pick any of those arrows, and in 99% of your hunting situations, they're going to work fine. after that, so once you understand that, you might go there and say, okay, here's a whole bunch of Easton arrows. Which ones for me? You could look at the price point and say, I don't want to spend a lot, or hey, you know what? I'm a pretty avid bow hunter. I don't mind spending a few extra dollars. I'm going to pick up an FMJ, or I'm going to pick up an Axis. What you're going to get with that is you're going to get a smaller diameter arrow. You start getting a little bit more of an edge. And what I tell people when they're picking arrows is, you're trying to give yourself the best chance you can to make a good, clean kill. And what that means is maybe I'll get a little bit of a extra penetration. Maybe I'll get a better performance in the wind by going with a small diameter. So as we go, I should back up a little bit too and say this. The small diameter arrows require more specialized material, higher grade carbons. So that's why they're a little more expensive as well. So they're a little harder to make, and that's why they cost more. But what you get is you get a more higher performance arrow, really. And so you shoot, say, a 4mm or a 5mm, it's going to perform a little bit better. And that just gives you a more confidence. When you draw back your bow, and I'm sure you're like me, and any archer really, when you draw back and and you're confident in your bow, your setup, your broadhead, everything there, you make a better shot. So the more advantage you can get by shooting the best products you can, and whether it be your bow, your broadhead, or your arrow, the best products you can afford, you will make a better shot because you're confident in your setup. As you draw back and as you practice and as you get confident in your shooting, when you go out to hunt, you pull back. You don't have to sit around and wonder, where's my arrow going to go? Am I going to make a good hit? When you feel confidence in your shot, then you generally make a better shot. So things like the micro diameter, I've taken shots. I've been out in really windy conditions, and when you let that arrow go, you get a crosswind going, it's going to move that arrow out of the aim point. And the closer to center of where you're aiming that you can hit, the better off you're going to be. You're going to make a better shot. So it's incumbent upon us to try to maximize our confidence and make the best shot that we can. And in doing so, I would say shoot the best equipment you can afford because you're going to make a better shot. So it's true that we can pick any arrow in the Easton line and it'll perform really well. But as you start to move up in our line, you're starting to put more. You're starting to stack the deck in your favor a little more, if you will. So I always tell people, just shoot the best equipment you can afford. But if you're looking at the Easton line, I have full confidence in everything from our aftermath all the way up to our 4mm FMJ. I mean, they'll all work, and they'll all work in most hunting situations.
What about feathers versus blazers? And so when my very first set of Easton arrows, I put feathers on them. Very quickly, I took them off and I put blazers on them.
Yeah,
because
no problem.
Out, Midwest, it's always raining in September, October, November, and December. They get wet. They were just so putsy. So, but obviously they have their advantages. If a new archer comes to you and says, which would you recommend, or what do you think would be better for 3D archery, say, compared to hunting, what would your answer be?
Well, a lot of the target shooters really like the feathers. The feathers control the arrow really quick out of the bow. They're very accurate. They're very lightweight as well. So a 3D shooter would like the feathers because they're so light. They're not gonna hurt your speed. And you kind of nailed it, really. It's more than anything. It's a situation of durability and convenience. Feathers, I think, perform excellent. I've seen world-class target shooters shooting feathers. Generally, feathers are best in shorter distances, say 50 yards in and closer. We're talking target archery here, of course, but they provide excellent stability very quickly out of the bow, but they're not as durable. You get out into a wet situation or just shooting them in general, they wear out a little quicker. So, but feathers are still very, very popular because they perform so well. They're not quite as quiet either as the vanes. So the vanes really shine in durability. They work very well in inclement weather. and they're quiet. The feathers will they have that rougher surface, and as they fly through the air, they just make a little bit more noise. And it goes back to what I said before. If you're trying to maximize everything in your favor, as a hunting situation, you get into an area with, high pressure Texas whitetails or something where every little bit of noise might matter, you might want to think about a vane, because they're so wired. In an area where maybe they aren't, and you need quicker stability out of your bow, maybe you want to pick a feather. So, but really, what I wouldn't get hung up on it too much. So much in archery is personal preference. So, if you try shoot some arrows with feathers, shoot some arrows with vanes. If you really, find that something works well for you, pick that. Because again, I always come back to confidence in the shot. When I'm in a situation where I've been practicing and I absolutely know where my arrow's going to hit, I just make such a better shot. And so, if you really shoot better with feathers, go with those. If vanes, durability, you don't want to get in a situation where, it's really wet and you draw back and you don't know, you don't know if you're, where your arrow's going to go. You start losing a little bit of confidence in your shot. That can affect you. That can affect your performance as an archer as well. So, I would just say, look at your situation, and really what you're most comfortable with is what's going to work best for you, and because they'll both perform really well as a material.
Agreed. I just don't like the putziness, and I know lots of people who swear by their feathers. It's just, I just don't care for the putziness. Like you said, it's just personal preference.
They're beautiful. They make beautiful arrows just to look at and to hold and to feel. They perform really well, but I'm not the kind of guy that likes to mess around with my setup. Some of my coworkers here, they love. Half the fun of archery for them is building arrows, tweaking them, trying different things. So they're more likely to try feathers and different things. They'll try 4 vanes, they'll try 3 vanes. They'll try different shapes. They'll try shield cut. They like to mess around with that. I just like to get out and hunt.
Right, exactly.
I like get something that works for me, and other guys really like to tinker with their equipment, and so it just depends on the person. So I'm more of a vane guy because of that. I'd rather just get out and work on making sure I can make a good shot, but then get out and hunt. I like to just get out and hunt and not really have equipment that I have to tweak around and mess around with a lot. And it's but for some people that's part of the hobby. It's like tying flies or reloading or whatever it might be. Working the equipment is half the fun for those guys, and that's great. We love that too. So it just depends on the person.
What do you think is the number one question that you get asked, as obviously having worked for Easton for how long?
24 years, actually, yeah.
What is the number
I've been thinking about arrows a lot.
What is the number one question that people ask you?
I would say I think you've kind of touched on it.
Okay.
What's the difference? Why you guys make so many arrows? And I think it's the, it really is what, I'm confused, which is the arrow right for me, and it's hard for me to answer that because it really goes back to what I was saying. They'll all work for you. Most the majority of us are hunting whitetails and turkeys and then to some degree hogs and bears and elk, and that covers most of the hunting that happens in North America. But primarily it's a whitetail game, and so anything in the Easton line will work really well. So I get that question a lot: is which one of all these arrows should I pick? And for most hunters in most situations, they're hunting grab lines, tree stands, in shots that are under 30 yards. You don't need to think about it too much, but where you want to get in and maybe look at. So if you're an archer that doesn't really spend a lot of time or doesn't really know, I would say, pick something in the line that is, a good value. You might want to pick an Axis or an Aftermath. and just get out there and hunt with it. And just know and be confident that it's going to work well for you. We've been making arrows for 95 years. We still make them right here in the United States, and we make sure that no arrow leaves the factory that isn't going to perform well in the field, whether it be for tournament shooters or for bow hunters. So you should have confidence in the Easton brand, but get out there and use that. So, but as you start to say, hey, what can I do to give myself a little bit more edge, a little bit more advantage? So if I catch a bone or the animal jumps the string a little bit, then you start saying, well, maybe you want to look at a 4 or 5 millimeter, FMJ or Axis or something like that. That'll give you a little bit more penetration in a situation where maybe you catch a shoulder, catch bone. So that's where you start looking for an extra edge in your setup, because not every hunting situation is going to be that perfect broadside 20-yard shot where the animal stays still and there's no wind blowing, and there's all those factors that we all want that shot, but we don't always get it. So that's where I say, yes, they'll all work. Just understand that. So don't get too frustrated in the fact that we make a lot of different arrows. Where we start to make a lot of arrows, though, is when we start to say, hey, we want to give archers a choice, those guys that are looking for an extra advantage. So we're going to make arrows of different diameter for those guys that really want to add a little extra performance to their setup. That's why we make, a 5 millimeter or a 4 millimeter. And so there are a whole lot, but they all work really well. It just is dependent upon how much performance are you really, really looking for, and do you want to give yourself that extra edge?
Let me ask you a kind of a girly question.
Okay.
Some arrow makers make a line specifically for women.
Uh-huh.
I have very strong opinions about that, but do you ever see Easton deciding, I personally don't feel it's necessary. My Axis 500s, I just want it to kill shit. I don't care if it's pink. I don't care if it has ladies written on it. I just want it to work.
Sure.
But that's just me. Do you see yourself, the company ever going that route? Or are you just like, you know what? We're all just hunters, and that's that.
What we do to some degree. So let me tell you what we do. We have arrows. Say our kind of our mainstay hunting arrow is an Axis. We have other models too, but that's one of our mainstay arrows, and really, it's kind of our all-around performer. It's got micro diameter. It's a good combination of kinetic energy and speed. It's the arrow I would recommend as probably the best performer, the best balance between price, performance, durability, everything. Okay. We make that arrow in a size all the way down to 700 and all the way up to about a 260. So if you're an NBA player with incredibly long arms and a really long draw length, we have that 260 that's going to work for you. And then we go all the way down to a 700. So in essence, we do make an arrow that is meant for I would say shorter draw, lighter pounded shooters, which oftentimes are women. Not always, but oftentimes they are. So we do sort of cover that, and that's kind of been Easton's thing from the get-go, is that we have an arrow that goes down to it's a tiny 12-14 aluminum, and a little kid that might be, a very, very young beginner archer could shoot that, and our desire is to have an arrow for every type of archery and every type of archer. And so that includes hunters. And so we have an arrow that's spined out for you depending on, what your draw length is and how much poundage you shoot. So even if you shoot a 24-inch arrow, we've got a hunting arrow that's going to work in your setup. So that's the desire, and that's how we've kind of approached the question that you just posed, is you're going to make a women's only arrow. Well, yes and no. It's got all our axis is our axis, whether it be for men, women, or the performance is all the same. We just make a size that'll fit just about anybody that wants to go hunting.
That's perfect. I like that philosophy. I genuinely don't have a problem with anyone who I want pink arrows. Good for you. If it gets you out and it gets you out in the woods, I'm all for it. But I just like that you guys just focus on the arrow instead of branding and marketing.
Well, and we did, and some people, there's people that they like to put their own sort of personality into their setup, right?
Oh,
with, accessorizing the bow and all that. So we have a pink ion in the line that we make in a 5 and a 600 spine. So if somebody wants to accessorize their bow with some pink highlights, they got an arrow that'll look great with it. It's the ion, a real high quality all carbon arrow. So we try to cover the bases, and that's where I get that question. Going back to that question, what's your most common question you get? Well, why do you have so many arrows? Well, because not every archer is the same, and so some of it is fashion. Some of it absolutely is fashion, but the underlying foundation, the arrow that's underneath all the cosmetics, all the way it looks, is a high quality arrow that's going to work well in a hunting situation. If you look up and down our hunting line, so everything else after that is kind of splitting hairs. So you could look through our catalog and say, you know what, I'm going to pick the arrow that I like the way it looks. Or, we have wood grain arrows if you happen to be a traditional shooter and want a wood grain arrow. Or there's any number of factors or approaches that an archer can bring to the table in terms of what they desire and what they're trying to get out of their setup. And that really is why it can be confusing, because you look at up and down the line and you go, why so many arrows? Well, some of them are really lightweight. Some of them are heavier for more kinetic energy. Some of them are built for fashion, like our pink ion. Some of them are built for just no-nonsense performance, like our axis. So there's a lot of ways to approach archery and a lot of ways to approach the arrow. And that's why we have so many different choices, is because every archer's a little bit different, and you personalize it. I mean, if you go to the shoe store, how many different types of shoes do you have? It's kind of the same thing. People like to have, our archers like to have some choices, and that's why we do what we do. But it's not intended to be daunting or confusing. It's really so that everybody has a choice. And I like to come on these programs because I try to get some information that makes that a little easier for people and help them understand from our perspective as a company what we're trying to do. And really it does boil down to, we want to instill confidence in the archer, and we want everybody to have a great experience. One thing I think of is, it's not so much about the product, really. Whether you're trying to win your local 3D tournament, whether you're trying to win an Olympic medal, or whether you're having a heart-pounding moment, getting a white-tailed doe or a buck underneath you that you shoot. We all know that feeling that we get. It's when your heart starts to pound and you have those moments in the field. Having those moments is why we make the products we make. It's not about the product itself. It's we take care of all those details. We do all the engineering. We look at all the details. We come up with products that'll work great in the field, not because the product in itself is an end, but so that we can have those heart-pounding moments, so we can get in the backyard and shoot with our kids. Those wonderful moments of being able to shoot a bow and arrow. That's why we do what we do, and it's not about the product. It's just being able to have those moments in the field, or have those moments in the out in the tournament, or just shooting and having fun in the backyard. And we look at everything. We say safety first, quality second, and great service third, and then cost last. We really look at those things as a company and say, hey, you know what? These things are important so that people can get out and be confident in their shooting, but also have a great time.
That was fantastic. That was like the perfect wrap up for this episode too.
Yeah, it goes quick. Time's probably up, but I could go on and on. And if you ever want to talk arrows, I am more than happy to do it. As you can tell, I think about it. It's way too much. We're constantly consumed in it, and we look at it, all day long, every day, because it's what we do well, and it's something that we believe in. But I am more than happy to get on with you if you want to look at one of these topics in more depth, anytime, I'd be happy to address it and at least share what I know and what I've gathered up over the years in terms of information.
Definitely take you up on that. I'm such a nerd when it comes to this stuff. This stuff fascinates me so much. Like, I'm listening to you and I'm just like totally geeking out on all the tech stuff.
Yeah, I know.
It's awesome.
It's an interesting thing to be wrapped up in, but hey, you gotta be passionate about something, I guess.
You do. And this is fun because it's amazing how such a small little, just an arrow, there's so many facets and it can get so complex and there's so many complicated things to talk about just in this one little arrow. It's so cool.
It is. And when you think about it, though, you got your bow stays with you when you shoot, but the arrow is what goes down range. So it's an important aspect of the sport we love. So it's important that we take care of all the details and make sure that they're good and that they work well.
All right, Gary, tell the listeners where they can go to find out more about you and Easton Archery.
I would, go to EastonArchery.com. I've produced, we have a video library, we have a YouTube channel, and you can go to our product pages. You got products or videos linking out of those pages if you want to know, what the grains per inch of one of our arrows are, or just need to pick a arrow spine for your bow setup. You just go to EastonArchery.com or go to our YouTube channel. There's lots of information there, and we are continually improving things all the time. So we're always looking for new videos to do and just to help people get out there and have a good time.
Awesome. Good deal. All right. Well, thank you again for coming on. And something tells me we'll have you on a lot sooner than 4 years.
Happy to do it. I appreciate it. Happy to do it.
And that'll do it. Thanks so much for listening to this week's episode. I hope you enjoyed it and learned a lot. You can find me on Twitter, Carrie Zylka, CarrieZylka. You can find me on Facebook. You can send me a friend request. You can follow the HuntFishTravel page on Facebook as well. Just search HuntFishTravel. I'm pretty much everywhere. Any social media. So go find me. Say hi. And if you found value in this episode, head over to iTunes or Stitcher Radio and leave me a 5-star review and a comment, if you would. Alternatively, if you'd like to support the show, you can check out my Patreon page, patreon.com/HuntFishTravel, all one word. Donate $1, you can buy me a cup of coffee. And thank you for your support.